Hi, this is Benoy Thanjan, your host of the Solar Maverick Podcast, and also the founder and CEO of Renew Energy. Renew Energy, we're a solar developer and consulting firm. We've developed more than 100 megawatts of solar projects across the US, and we help clients execute clean energy projects with confidence. We act as your owner's rep, overseeing developers, EPCs, and financing partners to de-risk your project and keep it on schedule. We also provide development as a service, supporting origination strategy and execution so you can advance projects without building a large internal team. On the renewable energy credit side, we offer REC brokerage, REC asset management, and custom renewable energy credit research, helping clients understand pricing, policy shifts, and long-term market dynamics. In addition, we provide new market analysis and financial modeling to evaluate opportunities, assess project viability, and support investment decisions. To learn more, reach out at info@renewenergy.com. That's info@reneuenergy.com. We'll also have information on the notes of the podcast as well. Let's get into it.
I bought a Tesla 2 years ago. I'm still fighting the IRS over my tax credit. They're saying it was used. I bought it directly from Tesla. Obviously new. I have all the paperwork that says it's new. I bought it. If they can't get that right, how are they going to tell me if 10,000 residential systems have 40% non-Chinese equipment or 50% made in the US? Like, oh my word, the nightmare that this is going to be just gives me heart palpitations.
Hello and welcome to the Solar Maverick Podcast, where solar meets entrepreneurship and experience. I'm your host, Benoy Thanjan, so let's get into it.
Hi, this is Benoy, your host of the Solar Maverick Podcast. I'm really excited on this episode of the podcast. We're doing a 2026 U.S. residential solar outlook. It is Thursday, January 2026, and I'm excited to have my co-host and friend, Nate Jovanelly. He is the CEO and founder of Sunraise Capital. Their mission is to provide affordable and accessible renewable energy options to homeowners to create a sustainable future. Nate, welcome to the Solar Maverick Podcast.
I always love being here. It's great to see you, Benoy.
Great to see you. Yeah, and there's like so many episodes that you've co-hosted. It's like more than double. I feel like 14 or 15 people, the interviews that we have and the banter and unique insights, especially now, there's a lot of consolidation in the US residential solar market with the big, beautiful bill now. You only could take in 2026 the investment tax credit as a lease. So there's been a lot of, changes. If our audience is not familiar, Nate, it would be great if you could first talk about, yourself and what you're doing at Sunraise.
Yeah, I feel like there's so many times. I try and condense it every time. Really, Benoy, what people want to know is who's going to coach the Giants next year?
I was going to ask you that. That was the funny thing.
That's what everybody wants to know. So anyway.
And I are diehard Giants fans, even through all this losing.
It's going to be Harbaugh, isn't it?
It's going to be Harbaugh.
Who's the guy from Cleveland? I thought it was going to be him, but now
Stefanski.
That's it. Yes. Sorry, I got us off track, but hey, you got to live a little. Just talk solar all the time. Actually, we can. That's mostly what we talked about. Yeah, no, I appreciate it. So yeah, Sunraise, you could think of us, the easy way to say this is we're sort of the Airbnb of solar. So we're a turnkey solar platform where anyone can bring capital, whether it's private equity, family office, institutional, and we can deliver them reviewed institutional grade assets. So we could do everything from proposals and credit checks the whole way through QA, QC review. We put guardrails in place to make sure that customers are saving money from day one. And, we predominantly do TPO, third-party ownership, so leases and power purchase agreements. Loans are not as popular as they were because of the new rules, which I'm sure we'll be talking about later, but we do have the ability to do that as well. So in a nutshell, that's Sunraise, and that's what we do. We're just an asset-light company. Again, that's why I liken it to Airbnb. Like, we don't own the home, but we're connecting the home with the renter, or in this case, leaseor with the leasee, and then we have a network of installers that help make that happen.
Yeah, and can you talk about maybe like what states you're focused on?
Yeah, we grew up in Florida. Frankly, Florida is one of the easier states for residential leasing, but we're in 9 states, and that's going to expand here in actually tomorrow. We're opening a bunch of new states, including New York and others. Our largest partner on the capital side is Palmetto Lightreach. We do a lot of business with them. So a lot of that is through them. And then we also do, again, some bespoke funds that have more of an expanded FICO, smaller in scale. Those are predominantly revolve around Texas and Florida, two very good, solid markets for residential solar.
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate the quick summary of Sunraise Capital. It's exciting times. Where is like residential solar headed in 2026? People are rushing to build stuff in 2025, especially to take advantage of the investment tax credit for like homeowners, right? You still could take advantage of the investment tax credit, but it has to be structured with the third party ownership model. Can you talk about like what's happened in 2025, how the big beautiful bill changed the incentives for residential solar, and then what is going to happen in 2026?
I know we briefly touched on this on the last one, so I'll just gloss over it and certainly can dive in more if it makes sense. But Section 25 of the tax code, 25D, is the residential solar portion of the tax credit that was removed by the big beautiful bill back in July. As a result, as of December 31st, an individual homeowner can no longer take advantage of the tax credit or any of that. They never could take advantage of the adders, but now they can't even take advantage of the base 30% tax credit. It's also, really can't, they don't, there are ways out there that people are trying to find for those individual homeowners to take the depreciation as well. But most of the time, large majority is the homeowner isn't able to take advantage of that depreciation. You have to do some special things to make that work. And even that, I'm not entirely sure if it works or not. There's always, I think, been, since the IRA, a slight advantage for the consumer to do a lease. You can always buy the system out in year 6 in most leases, or I'm going to use lease, PPA, and TPO interchangeably. So let's just get that out of the way. I try and stick with one, but so there's cash loan.
Do you want to briefly define what third-party ownership is and a lease and how that's different from a PPA?
There's going to be technical definitions and there's high-level definitions because you got to break it down to the attorney level. A lot of PPAs look like leases because it's a fixed monthly payment. I define it as a PPA, a power purchase agreement. You are paying for the power produced. Okay. Even if a lease is priced that way, you're generally paying for the panels and then you're paying a fixed payment based. Generally, the pricing is scaled based on how much power they're expected to produce. But I would say that a power purchase agreement, you're truing up at some point. Maybe it's every year. Maybe it's variable by month. Hey, we produced this much this month, so you owe this times your kilowatt hour rate, production times kilowatt hour rate, you owe $230. And then next month it's $300 because there's more sunshine. In the winter, maybe it's $50. And if you're doing a sort of a fixed payment power purchase agreement, that generally means there's some kind of true up at the end of the year. Hey, you overproduced by 5%. So you owe us, $100, or you underproduced by 5%. So we owe you a $100 credit. Where a lease is just a fixed monthly payment, whether it's flat annually or escalates annually, depends on your contract and your situation. And it's not generally trued up unless your production guarantee is triggered. And that assumes you're in a state that allows a production guarantee. Like Florida, you're not allowed to have a production guarantee. It's a true equipment lease. So there's different types of leases and there's all these little nuances to it. But for me, my pea brain, I think of it about, are you truing up and paying for the actual power exactly what was produced at the end of the year? If yes, then it's probably a power purchase agreement. If no, it's probably a lease. But for all intents and purposes, they can look very similar. That's how I think of it. And those two together, whether it's a lease, a PPA, and now there's some new ones I think we talked about on the last podcast, but these are all referred to as third-party ownership. So somebody else is owning it, and that enables them to take the tax credits and depreciation. And back full circle to your first question, since the homeowner can no longer take the tax credit and largely could never take the depreciation, loans are really almost zero at this point. At least that's what I'm seeing in the market. I'm sure there's still maybe 15%, but you're talking about, a few years ago, especially through COVID years when money was basically free, loans were 80% of the market. And now you're seeing that massive shift back. And that's solar, right? I mean, before the loans were even out, it was all effectively third-party ownership and leases. And then loans came in and capital got cheap and loans took over. And I have some other theories as to why loans were popular in that time besides just low interest rates. Now that the customer can't take advantage of the tax credit anymore, and you can still take advantage of it under Section 48 of the tax code, which is more for businesses, corporations, it makes a lot more sense to structure these deals where somebody else owns the system, not the homeowner, whether it's a loan or, again, a lease, and then the homeowner can take ownership in year 6. So now you're seeing prepaid leases where the customer will take a loan out and prepay the lease, and someone else owns it for 5 years to monetize the tax and depreciation. So there's all these different structures that are coming to light in order to still capture that tax credit for the individual homeowner. But I would say at this point, it's clearly a lot better in terms of, especially what most consumers are looking at, how much do I pay for energy now? How much am I going to pay once I go solar? And in this case, you're going to have a lower payment with a lease. It's going to be less than the utility rate because most lease providers require that. And I think that generally leases are going to be a much better deal in the foreseeable future. There's some caveats there that we can get into if you want, but I'll leave it at that.
And then interesting enough is like if you do third-party ownership for a residential system, you could take advantage of energy communities and the domestic content adder. That's correct, right?
Yeah, if it's a TPO. So the adders in the IRA never were incorporated into Section 25, at least to the best of my knowledge. That's how I remember it. It's kind of like, feels like a lifetime ago at this point, because the last week I've been dealing with not only the real issue here, I think for a lot of installers, if you want to cut to it, there's an issue if you're all cash and loans, you got to convert over to leases or try and compete against them. But the real issue here is the addition of this foreign entities of concern language, so referred to as FIAC. And as of January 1st, you have to have a certain percentage of equipment that is not manufactured effectively in China, is not sourced from China, is not Chinese controlled. It's foreign entities of concern, so they don't specifically say China, but in reality, that's what we're talking about here. And that's really added a layer of complexity to this. That and domestic content. The domestic content went from, to get the 10% or so, the base tax credit we're talking about for homeowners or TPO is 30%. Then there's, as you mentioned, an adder for energy communities that's 10%. So if you're in Texas or Pennsylvania, you're probably in an energy community, and then you get a 40% tax credit. Then you can get another 10% if you use domestic content material, and that bar increases every year. So last year was 45%, and this year is 50%. It does seem that getting from 45 to 50 is a little bit more challenging and often requires down to the racking level, skirt, and all these different other components. Just adds a huge layer of complexity because you got to show that you're using all this equipment that adds up to 50% domestic content. And by the way, it still has to be FIAC compliant. So you could be domestic content theoretically and not pass FIAC, or vice versa. You could be FIAC and not pass domestic content. But if you don't pass the FIAC threshold, which is 40%, then you don't get any tax credit. So what we're seeing, or what I'm seeing, a major trend, I'm seeing a shift toward domestic content for all resi installers, because basically to get FIAC, it seems as though, I'm sure there's tons of caveats, it's very complex, but to get FIAC, the bar then to get domestic content is fairly low, is what I'm finding. It's still a nightmare to manage. It's just, man, it's added a layer of complexity, honestly, that I never really anticipated. That's coming from someone who's been in solar for a long time. It's definitely not a fun process.
Yeah, I appreciate you explaining all of that. I mean, it's interesting how complicated the government has made solar. You know, to me, it's like solar panels, inverters, and racking. And now it's like you have to worry, as you mentioned, about FIAC, domestic content, all these things. We were supposed to get guidelines on FIAC when the executive order was signed. I think it was like July 7th. And then we were supposed to get guidance in August for 2026 with foreign entity of concern. We haven't received any guidance yet, right?
Not that I've seen. And I thought for sure it had to come. Of course, it has to come out before the rule is implemented. And I hate this phrase, like, what keeps you up at night? This literally keeps me up at night. I usually sleep pretty soundly, but now I'm like, oh man, does this project qualify? If it doesn't qualify, I'm blowing up my whole, the economics don't work. And there's all these different layers. And what drives me nuts, this is funny. So, I bought a Tesla 2 years ago. I'm still fighting the IRS over my tax credit. They're saying it was used. I bought it directly from Tesla. It's new. I have all the paperwork that says it's new. I bought it. One of the reasons I bought it is to get the tax credit. It has a VIN associated with it, right? Yeah. So if they can't get that right, how are they going to tell me if 10,000 residential systems have 40% non-Chinese equipment or 50% made in the US? Like, oh my word, the nightmare that this is going to be just sort of gives me heart palpitations. But I think we've solutioned around it from a tech standpoint for our funds and with our large partners the best we absolutely can. I'm confident that we're doing it correctly, but it certainly has made a whole new bar, a new moat around the complexity of solar in general. Forget resi. This applies to all solar. It makes it that much more complex. And, part of me, I've talked about this before. I love it because you find the opportunity, right, through the complexity. That's just build your moat. But it has been an interesting start to the year for sure, trying to manage all these new rules.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting because you see a lot of companies safe harboring panels thinking that it's fiat compliant, even though we haven't really received the guidance. So there's a huge risk, right? That it might not qualify. I don't know if you heard there was some issues related to, I think it was Q cells in their plant in Georgia. They had some raw material shipped into the US and the US wouldn't allow it, saying that it came through the Uyghur tribe region in China, and they said it didn't. But then how can you use traceability to actually prove that? So it'll be interesting to see, this whole fiat. And it's interesting to me, how many law firms and accounting firms are talking about what's fiat compliant, but we haven't heard anything.
I can't help but smile. I was a minute late to this podcast because the conversation I just had is, okay, again, take it with a grain of salt, but there's all different interpretations, different attorneys. But if this end-phase inverter was manufactured before November 10th, it's not fiat compliant. If it's manufactured after November, great. How am I supposed to know that? And then when you go down literally to the nut and bolt of the racking, how do you prove that? It's on the bill of materials, but there's no serial number on the bolt. Like I said, they can't get a VIN right, which very clearly tied to one vehicle, the IRS. I love the IRS, by the way. Please don't audit me. But I'm arguing over my Tesla tax credit, which should be super cut and dry. It was new. Here's the VIN. It's linked to this. They've done it millions of times. Not for me. And then meanwhile, we have all of these assets that we're going down to the nut and bolt level to make sure they're fiat and or content compliance. You could try and prove it. We don't try. We keep amazing records. We do a calculation for every single job. Does this meet fiat? Does it meet domestic content? But even so, as you mentioned, the difference in one letter or number on a serial number that's 20 digits long could be the difference between meeting fiat and not. And it literally is that complex. It really is. And then one of the interesting parts with solar is it's never been extremely black and white. I don't care what anyone says, because this is the world I live in. You can go talk to 4 different tax attorneys and you will get 4 different opinions on what you can and can't do, what's compliant, what's not. The manufacturers had reliance letters last year. Now they're sending people to the actual plant for the traceability you're talking about. So there's all these things. And I've even seen some letters floating out from tax counsel. It says, yeah, this is fiat compliant. I saw one, I'm not going to name who it is, but I got one sent to me in November. And I was like, what? They haven't said exactly what the rule is yet. There's no guidance. We think it's going to be fiat compliant. So yeah, that's solar. People have been in it. They know exactly what I'm talking about. This isn't a surprise to anyone. It's just part of the cycle of solar. But you can see my beard gets slightly more gray every time I come on this. And this is 100% why.
Yes, seriously. Yeah, it's really confusing to understand. I appreciate you providing a lot of insights to it. And how has customer acquisition changed during this time, to educate the customer about what's happening, to get them comfortable maybe with third-party ownership. It was interesting because we had this conversation before in the podcast, and you just talked about it, how loans were very cheap at a certain time, right? Because the interest rates were so low. So that really pushed more of an ownership model when it came to solar. Now we're seeing it go back to the third-party ownership model, especially because they can't take advantage of the tax credits. Like, how has that influenced like educating the customer? Is customer acquisition still really high in residential solar? Is like platforms that you have basically making it easier for residential customers to come on a sort of shared platform or educating them?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I think education is the biggest thing, right? I think that the whole way through to policy, right? Like, again, Sia did a fantastic job with the IRA and fighting the BBB. So it's nothing against that. I genuinely mean that and believe it. I was sat on a lot of the calls, but our voice compared to the oil industry is small. And it's because everyday people don't understand the value. They don't, I've talked about, I don't have all the stats in front of me, but we've talked about this on the podcast. I mean, there's months, years now where like solar not only is the number one, but only new generation on the grid. So energy rates are skyrocketing because all the demand, data centers, AI, again, we've talked about all this. So I don't want to rehash it all. And then why aren't there more advocates for solar? Instead, there seems to be a narrative that, oh, solar makes energy more expensive. Like, what are we talking about, people? We're putting energy on the grid. It's the cheapest, fastest form to get energy on the grid. And that's what we need right now as a country is we need more energy. Why do you think energy prices are rising? It's supply and demand. There's more demand for energy and there's not enough supply. So that is going to continue to happen. And the weird thing is it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. The more power prices go up, the more customers are going to go towards solar. So how I'm going to tie this into exactly your question is, sure, I think there were a lot of loan markets where the customer didn't save money. They would sell you a system, you're selling you an ownership, you're not saving money, right? And that's okay. Leases, because you're underwriting the system, not the person, you're underwriting the asset. So a loan, you underwrite the person, a lease, you underwrite the system. I want to make sure you, Benoy, are saving money if I own the system on your roof. Why? Because if your alternative is to say, you know what, I'm not going to pay you, shut my system off, I'm going to go to utility and save $50 a month, that doesn't put me in a good position. My only position that I want to be in is, hey, Benoy, you got to get power from somewhere. You're not going to live in your home without power. I can sell it to you for $50 a month cheaper. Why would you not pay me? Let's work together and figure this out, right? So I think what you're seeing is rising utility rates are also allowing more and more lease markets. So before, when loans took over, you had two factors. You had cost of power was low, but they didn't need to show savings necessarily. So that's one. The second one was interest rates were really low. Now, again, as you know, and I know, like behind the scenes, as the consumer, you're buying down that interest rate without knowing it. You're not actually getting a 0% interest rate. You're paying for that. And you're often paying a lot for that, 30% of the project cost or more. But that was the perception, right? So I think that you're going to see this trend toward TPO regardless. Certainly the tax credits help. And there's no reason you can't buy the system for the fair market value, which usually is the future cash flows or, net present value of the cash flows at some discount rate for the remainder of the term. There's no reason as a consumer you can't do that. It's going to be cheaper than foregoing the tax credit and choosing ownership. So as far as the sales side, I don't think I've heard anyone ever argue, and there might be somebody out there, I would like to hear the argument. Leases are a lot easier to sell because if you're going to a normal consumer, you're not talking about tax credits and how much money do you make and do you qualify and how do I submit a tax credit and what does that mean? I don't have an accountant. I use QuickBooks, whatever, right? Most people don't know what a kilowatt hour is. So then try and layer on a tax credit is difficult. For a lease, it's okay. How much are you paying for power? You're paying $200. How would you like to pay $150 on average? Okay, cool. Let's go. So again, oversimplified, but they don't have to worry about tax credits or maintenance or any of those things. Someone else is going to take care of it. Here's contractually your obligations. And here's their obligations to maintain this. And by the way, if they don't maintain it and it doesn't produce any power, you don't have to pay them and then they're not making any money and they spent, $40,000 to put this asset up and they're losing money. So no one's going to do that. I just always felt that leases were more aligned with the consumer than a loan. I know there's people out there that will violently disagree with that. And again, I would love to have that conversation anytime, but that's my opinion. So I'm entitled to it.
Yeah, you definitely are entitled. And I guess that is the most popular with residential customers. It's a lot easier for them to understand and it simplifies the transaction in a sense as well. We talked about this before too, So are you seeing a lot more coupling with solar and energy storage for residential customers?
Yeah, I've continued to see it rise. I feel like it lagged. Like we talked about this many times.
We've
Like,
been talking about this for years, by the way.
I know it's like fuel cells. I gave up on those. But that first time I went to RE Plus, when it was RE Plus and SPI, and there's just batteries everywhere. It's like, it's happening. And then it's like, what is that? Austin Powers, when the car's coming like half a mile an hour. It's like, no, that's sort of what I felt like with batteries. But now I think it's actually here. I do think batteries make a ton of sense for consumers if you're doing solar. I mean, there's just so many reasons why. I think it's good for the TPO companies as well. Protects you against future changes to net metering. Not that anything's going to be retroactive. It just puts more control. And then if you're in an area like I am where there's hurricanes, like most people have a generator or something anyway. So if you're going to go solar, just throw a power wall or two on there. And now you have lights when all your neighbors are dark or trying to wait in line for 4 hours to get gas to put their generator. So we are definitely seeing a higher attachment rate. We're also seeing, besides battery costs coming down, which was necessary, and that'll continue to happen. I think we're also seeing more battery only jobs, right? And the battery tax credit is extended longer than solar. Again, not for a homeowner, but for TPO. So that's, we were one of the first to launch the Palmetto LightReach battery only lease on our platform. So if you already have solar and you want to add a battery, you can now do that, and you can do it in a lease, and they can take the tax credit, lower the cost of ownership for you. And I've done the math. It's cheaper to do a battery lease, even though it's a shorter term than solar, because the batteries don't have as long of a warranty. You can sometimes buy them up, but it's not here nor there. It's still cheaper cost of ownership, again, because you get the same tax credit than doing a loan. Now, there's some other things out there that we talked about in the past, and I alluded to in the beginning, where maybe somebody else owns it and they give you 30% to take the tax credit and depreciation, or 20% or 25, whatever it is. And then you either pay cash or get a loan for the rest. So there's other creative finance structures out there. But I still think that, the fact that there's a battery only lease, if you're a customer that went solar, say 5 years ago or 10 years ago, and batteries weren't really a thing then, and you want more resiliency, or you live in one of these areas where you lose power, which I do think is going to get more common. And I mean, you're seeing the warning signs from PJM and others, because mainly these data centers and things. But again, if you're a customer that wants to add a battery, you now have options to do that. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, it was hard to even finance just a battery loan even. So now I think there's going to be a lot more batteries attached to jobs moving forward. And I guess also just point out the other driver of that, as we've been discussing, the driver of all this, right? Utility rates. As utility rates go up, $100 a month for that battery backup, so I can have lights when the power goes out, or have that comfort or peace of mind. If I can get solar and a battery and pay the same amount or less than I was paying the utility, now the battery sounds really attractive, right? I mean, there's still going to be folks that just want to save as much as possible. That's great. Again, as battery prices continue to come down, I mean, when you started, solar was $750 a watt, legitimately costs $750, not without the customer acquisition cost and everything else that people do to get it to cost $750. And now probably $2, not even, it's less than that, but yeah. So the most expensive part, as you mentioned earlier, is the customer acquisition cost. And I guess, while I'm on that tangent, when you think about, you're saying, how are people adapting from a consumer standpoint? I've said this many, many times, sound like a broken record. Solar is still sold, it's not bought, right? So most consumers aren't going and doing their research and saying, I want to go solar, so I'm going to call these local companies. It's somebody knocks on their door, they get a Facebook ad, whatever, and then somebody calls them and they sell them the product, which is why the customer acquisition cost is so high. And over time, we're going to see more and more penetration, like in California and Hawaii, where consumers are educated and utility prices are so high, they're shopping for solar. And now you can go direct to consumer. You can cut a lot of that cost out. You could save a lot of money. And I think that's really the inflection point for residential solar. I mean, again, here in Florida, it's interesting. They talk about, oh man, it's one of the top states for residential solar. It's pretty hard to do commercial here, but you hear, oh man, all these people going solar in Florida are going to drive up the cost for people who don't go solar. And it makes me chuckle at that talk track, because and you can Google this, go for it. There's more home starts in Florida than solar installations per year. So in other words, the penetration's going backwards. I think SIA has it at like 5%, but I'd love to see how they got to that number. It's like just under 5%. Because yeah, I mean, just Google the amount of home starts in Florida. It's mind boggling even now. And then look at how many solar projects get permitted. So again, there's just so much runway for solar. And as it becomes more commonplace, the cost, we got the equipment cost down, although now the equipment cost is going back up because there's only so much equipment you can use per the first half of our conversation, which is an issue. But still, the bigger or overarching cost is the customer acquisition cost.
Yeah, for sure. That's a great way of explaining, the customer acquisition. As you mentioned, it will go lower over time. I know we spoke about this too on a prior podcast. Like in the future, people will be buying residential solar through Amazon, which, that's like the ultimate way of lowering customer acquisition.
Amazon, hit me up. We can do it. No, I'm saying if somebody's listening, call me. We'll help you out. You can sell it through, we'll put it right on Prime Guarantee. You'll ship a drone to the customer. They'll open the box. The drone will just fly up, do the site survey, land back in the box. They throw a piece of tape on it, mail it back to you. It goes to the next customer. I got it all planned out. It'll be great.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, at this point, like with technology, especially like with drones, you don't need a physical person to, meet the homeowner and go onto the roofs and then to get an accurate drawing, which is pretty amazing if you think about it, like just how quickly things have changed. Well, first thing I was going to ask, is it only for battery backup that people are using the batteries? Are there also like using ancillary services or selling back to the grid?
Yeah.
During time.
It's getting more and more popular in California. It's all time of use. So you pretty much require a battery. Texas, I think it's very smart to incorporate a battery. They are having more programs. I know there's a program even here in Florida. It's utility by utility. It is catching on because it's a lot faster to, I mean, I was looking at this literally over 10 years ago when I was at IGS. We were looking at buying discarded used i8 test batteries from BMW and put them every home because the ancillary market back then, it's a long story, but they're paying a lot in order to be able to instantaneously effectively give and take power to keep the grid at 60 hertz. So there's all these ancillary markets, and it's a lot easier to control a fleet of batteries or other hot water heaters you can do to give and take power to the grid as opposed to firing up a gas peaker plant. So utilities recognize that and they'll pay you for that service. So on the customer level, generally it's a rebate or you can opt in and get a small yearly fee as participating in that. And behind the scenes, they'll control your battery to give or take power depending on what the needs of the grid are. Again, there's time of use and energy arbitrage. So store power. If most places outside of California, and I think Texas is heading this direction, most places it's the power is the most expensive in the day. Like take Florida, we don't have time of use here, but generally speaking, if we did, there's more power being consumed in the day. Again, supply and demand, it's going to cost more. So when you look at California, say, it's more expensive now in the day, and it's actually the evening hours because there is a lot of solar on the grid where power is cheaper. So what do? You use power from the grid during the day when it's less expensive. You store the power from your solar, and then you use your battery, your storage at night when power is more expensive. So that would be a form of energy arbitrage. And I think we'll see more and more of that as time goes on. But the bottom line is if you have a battery, no matter when power is the most expensive, you can solve for that. So I think that in the future, it's a great way to manage your load and have resiliency and cost. And there's a lot of benefits outside of just backup power. And, a lot of markets, backup power probably doesn't make sense. If you never lose power, which again, is probably going to change in the future. But I just think like when I lived in Pennsylvania, like we never lost power. If I lost power for 2 minutes, it was an anomaly. And now in Florida, I lose power all the time. So I have a whole different respect for backup power and batteries. But like you said, there's so many other uses for them. And some cases you can get a rebate for it. And I think we'll see more and more of that over time. And eventually it'll be 100%. I don't know when that's going to be, but in the future, I would anticipate there'll be 100% attachment rate of batteries. or some kind of storage or backup.
That makes sense. And then what about like consolidation? Like what's happening in the residential market with like residential installers and financiers? It seems right that the challenging environment.
Certainly is. I think the biggest challenge right now, if I had to peg it, is it's just equipment supply. There's only so much equipment that meets all these requirements. So it's causing prices to go back up. And again, I think we probably have talked about this in the past. At some point, prices are going to go so high, people are going to be like, screw it. I'm going to buy cheap panels from China, and the homeowner can't get the tax credit anyway. And then I'll go back and I'll sell some more loans. Because if the cost of equipment, I'm just going to make up a number, but panels and inverter are over $1 a watt to be fiat compliant, and it's, I don't know, 50 cents to not, there's some break point there. That's not it. But, just again, I'm making up a round number. There's some break point there where it still makes sense to do loans. And I know there's people out there still doing loans. I've talked to one today. You don't get the tax credit. In some respects, that probably makes it easier to sell. It's just not as good of a deal for the customer. I've heard some crazy stats, and I don't know what's true, but about how many people actually apply for the tax credit anyway. They hear about it and they forget, or they never apply. And if you're doing a loan, almost all the time you're re-amming your loan. So in other words, you get your tax credit and you got to use that to pay the loan company to keep your price down. Yeah. So it's not like you just get a lower energy cost and you get this tax credit, generally speaking. That's how it worked in the past. So I think the industry will continue to adapt and evolve. I think it comes down to energy cost versus system cost. And certainly just look at other areas like Australia. You can get solar for $1.40 or less on a residential property. And we'll get there someday. It's like so ubiquitous, like everyone has it. So it's inexpensive. There's no customer acquisition cost. And I think we'll get there at some point. Right now, solar more expensive, but then you're offsetting it with this 10% tax credit adder. It's kind of a weird structure, I guess, if you think about it. You're just, taxpayers are paying more for effectively. It's where the money's coming from because you're giving these tax credits, but the government's also making the equipment much more expensive by limiting supply effectively. So it's kind of an interesting dichotomy.
Yeah, definitely. It doesn't make sense, but that's the way it is, I feel like. And then you started Sunraise now? Is it been 2.5, 3 years?
2.5 years, yeah.
Yeah, like the Solar Maverick podcast is about solar and entrepreneurship. You're the original Solar Maverick. Like, what have you learned the past 2.5 years, or what advice would you give to entrepreneurs if they're starting their own business, especially challenging, turbulent times?
Man. Solar is very interesting. It's like, I always question people that are in it, like you and I, like we're just gluttons for punishment. I think it's every time you think you have some stability, it's like, man, some crazy change comes along. Again, I think that's going to smooth out over time. I mean, as far as starting a business goes, it's just a grind. I don't think people respect and understand. I was listening to the Rogan podcast with Jensen, the NVIDIA founder.
From NVIDIA.
Did you listen to that?
I listened to part of it, not the whole thing. It's on my playlist. I'm still trying to get through Joe Rogan and Elon Musk's one.
The point is, it's wild to hear the story of NVIDIA and how many times that it almost went bankrupt. I mean, that's entrepreneurship. Yeah. It takes what people see as success, but they don't see all the hardship and everything you have to give up to get there, all the nights, weekends, the travel. And I think what they don't appreciate is the level of dedication it takes to run a successful business. And even myself, I don't think I fully appreciated it until I got into that position because, everyone sees you when you're on the summit, and the only people that get there are the ones that have the perseverance to make it through, because most businesses will fold because the founder, the team, they fold. At the FedEx story, right, where they took like their last $15,000 to Vegas to be able to make payment. You put it all on black or whatever and hit, and that's why FedEx is still here. This is what reminded me of the NVIDIA story, because I didn't know that. I think he's the longest public CEO. So there's a lot of interesting facts in there. But the point is, Sunraise, I think we're growing like crazy. Very good position, very fortunate to be there. It doesn't mean you take your foot off the gas, but, 5 years from now or whatever, when people are looking at it, it'll be like, oh, look, they did it. And they don't realize all of the craziness it took to get to this point. And it's just something that I think people don't fully appreciate and they sort of gloss over. So I would say my advice to the entrepreneur is, before you get into it, you need to make a commitment to yourself that you're absolutely never going to give up. You're not going to give up, even if there's $0 in your bank account. You got to keep going, because it's the people that quit. That's when the business dies. And those that don't, they are often, they make it out the other side and people are like, oh, that was easy, because they just see them when they're at the top. It's like seeing the buff guy at the gym, right? It's easy to say, oh, that guy, I wish I had that. Yeah, well, that guy's in the gym every morning from 4 to 8, or the athlete that's doing, like, they don't see all the work that goes in to get there. And I think it was Roger Staubach that said, the road is lonely on the extra mile. You got to be willing to go that extra mile, and there's going to be a lot of sacrifices along the way.
Yeah, this is all great advice. It's like almost like obsession in a certain sense with perseverance. And I don't think if you ever haven't started a business yourself, you understand how hard it is. Well, this has been an amazing interview. I'm surprised, already 50 minutes.
That's crazy.
Like, if our audience wants to learn more about Sunraise Capital or you, what's the best way that they could do that?
You can find me on LinkedIn. Is probably the best way. I haven't been as active as I'd like to be lately.
You're not 100% responsive.
It takes all of my waking thought and time to run this business. Something I'm very passionate about, though. That's probably the best way. We're going to revamp our website here. We can go to sunraisecapital.com, fill out a form, and we'll pick it up there too. Or you can just send me an email. It'll be in the notes. Any friend of Benoy is a friend of mine. So I always love the feedback from these podcasts. And if you have any questions or we can help you in any way, it's something that I like to do, is just connect good people to do great things.
Yeah, definitely. And is there anything that we haven't talked about in this interview that you think we should tell the Maverick?
Let's see. Let me go through the thoughts real quick. I think the only constant is change, right? And I think whether you're an entrepreneur or solar, like, solar is the perfect industry for that. And I think what I'm excited about is for solar to continue to mature. Like, I think there's 100% a world post tax credits. Like, that doesn't scare me. I just think there needs to be a plan, right? Like, it's the knee jerk in solar that seems to cause a lot of the turbulence. And if we just knew, like, if you had a crystal ball, and I know the tax credits are going to expire, like, everyone's safe harboring for the expiration of the tax credits. And we all know there's like probably a 50% chance that a new administration comes in and they reenact certain provisions to bring back the tax credit. Like, I don't even try and think that far ahead anymore when it comes to that specifically. But at the end of the day, I think, yeah, it's just perseverance and being nimble and trying to make it through a very complex industry. But at the same time, I think that's what makes it fun. And like I say, we all joke about it, like, why are we still doing this? But I think it's the challenge of the aspect that draws people to be in solar. So I don't have anything specifically other than buckle up. It's going to be a wild 2026. I think for installers, panels are going to be just equipment in general is going to be very tough. All of that will resolve itself over time. So if you're in a position where you're struggling to find supply or something, give me a call, see if I can help you out. But otherwise, I think you just got to get through this period, and the companies that survive are going to thrive, and solar is eventually going to mature, and we'll be able to find a way to move forward, because it is the cheapest, fastest cost of power that you can put on the grid. And if there's one thing that I am super confident in, is that we as a country are going to need more power.
Yeah, that's a great way to end the podcast. This is always, Nate, it's been a great interview. Thank you for making the time. Wishing you a healthy, prosperous 2026, since it's just a few days in, and I'm excited to see the continued progress of Sunraise Capital. So congrats.
Thanks, Benoy.
Oh, anytime. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Solar Maverick Podcast. The Solar Maverick Podcast is brought to you by Renew Energy. We're a solar development and consulting firm. If you believe that this podcast is adding value to you, please give us a 5-star review and share with those that you think could benefit from this information. Please email all questions, suggestions, and feedback to info@renewenergy.com. That's info at reneuenergy.com. The Solar Maverick Podcast is produced by Podcast Laundry and executive produced by Benoy Thanjan and Kevin Y. Brown.